From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern.
Today we're diving into the regulatory fallout from the aftermath of the Silicon Valley Bank collapse as President Biden says the financial system is on solid footing.
Americans can rest assured that our banking system is safe. Your deposits are safe. Let me also assure you, we will not stop at this. We'll do whatever is needed.
We have lawmakers on both sides of the aisle joining us today. Democratic Congressman Gregory Meeks of New York and Republican Congressman Bryan Steil of Wisconsin will join us this hour.
And President Biden is in California working on a mega deal with the United Kingdom and Australia over submarines. We'll speak to Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota, a member of the Armed Services Committee. But first, we want to thank you for joining Balance of Power at this new time slot. We know you're used to seeing Bloomberg technology here. We switched things up, and we brought Balance of Power to 5 p.m. Eastern and to Washington, D.C. We couldn't be more excited what's in store for you. But also, Joe, what an opportune time, given the fact that we had an entire weekend of government intervention in the financial markets. This is the intersection of Washington and Wall Street.
That's right.
And we're here to tell you those stories.
It's exactly how we planned it. Of course, it's not. But we are here for stories like this. And we're going to be hearing from some important voices today, as we just mentioned, and over the course of the week, including Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, House Financial Services Chair Patrick McHenry, House Oversight Chair James Comer, along with Senators Tina Smith, Chris Van Hollen, Sherrod Brown, Bill Cassidy. I could keep going, Anne-Marie, but we're going to be bringing people directly to the decision makers that impact your investments and your life.
Yeah, and it's not even just these stories about investments. Obviously, that's the financial regulation story today, and these concerns about not just Wall Street, but everyday Americans. People were calling me over the weekend, should I be moving my money? Where should I be? Where should I be banking? But also, the president is in California today. There's huge concerns in Washington about what goes on with China, export controls, sanctions. Wall Street is paying a lot more attention to what goes on in D.C.
Well, that's for sure. Here in Power Center, we've also got a number of stories that would be lead stories, massive events on any other day. And you just mentioned several of them, just part of the backdrop to an incredibly busy day in Washington.
Yes, exactly, and a busy week. And we want to get right to that top story, though. The chaos, really, in the financial markets. Joining us now is New York Democratic Congressman Gregory Meeks. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us as we launch our new show here. The president ended his speech today calling for tougher regulation. But is that almost dead on arrival with this divided Congress?
I think that we have to have that conversation. Clearly, for me, I was one that was involved and still in Congress at the time that we did the Dodd-Frank regulations. And then I was there that voted against some of the rollbacks that took place. But I think and hope that we know that this has interruptions and dangers to all Americans, no matter what your party affiliation is. And so we need to look to see what we can do for the future to try to prevent being in this situation. And stress testing, for me, one of the things that I think that was rolled back is one of those things that I think could have prevented us from being where we are now. That being said, I think the president was also correct today in saying that the system is sound. And for us not to panic, and there's no reason for folks to go rush other regulatory, small banks and regional banks and taking money out of them to go into big banks. Now, that would be the wrong thing to do, and that we're going to take care of all of those deposits and the small businesses and the depositories that were there for the people that put their money there to know that their money is accessible to them.
Congressman, not everyone is a fan of the way the administration handled this over the weekend. I spoke earlier today with Senate Banking Committee member Senator Bill Hagerty, a Republican, of course, who was not happy with the way this all worked out. He said the U.S. financial regulation system actually did receive a bid, that regulators got a bid for the collapsed Silicon Valley Bank over the weekend. Let's listen.
The auction process over the weekend failed. During the weekend, they actually did receive a bid. I'd urged strongly that they should take the most competitive offer and have a bank in place today when the market opened. Indeed, They allowed the bid to fail.
Congressman, do you know about that bid, and should it have been accepted instead of covering uninsured deposits?
Well, no, I don't know about that bid. I know that they were trying to get someone to acquire the banks, and I know that immediately the members of the Biden administration called and had a bipartisan conversation via Zoom, and they were searching for but had not received an offer at that particular time. And this was Sunday, yesterday, of which we had our conversation, and I know they're still seeking to get one. And I think that the only question would be is whether or not they, to look to see maybe we can incentivize someone to acquire, wanting to acquire the bank. That's the best way to get out of this. But until that time, that's why we are making sure that all of those that deposit their funds there, the small businesses in particular, that they are protected and that individuals know that their money is available to them as of when the banks open today, so that they do not have that risk. And I think that's the appropriate thing to do. But I did not hear of a significant offer that was made to acquire the banks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, do you think there'll be any other sort of auctions for SVB or Signature, given the fact that the government says that it doesn't even matter what limit it is, all of your deposits, all monies, they will get back to those individuals?
Well, I think, and I certainly want someone to acquire. I think that's the best way to ultimately have this crisis resolved. But we've got to get there, and that's why I said that we need to look at the possibilities of some incentives that we can put forward, so that individuals would look at the possibility of acquiring SVB or Signature. But the main thing to get there at this point is to make sure that people know that their money is safe. And that's what the president has emphasized, that your money is safe. There's no need to panic at the threat of not being able to access your dollars, especially those at SVB and Signature. They are safe, and the financial system is safe. That's the emphasis. Let's not panic.
Yeah.
And I should add that it's a big difference also, because I know in some people's minds is what took place in 2008. And I can tell you, as a legislator that was there in 2008, this is different. This is not the same thing. Number one, the scale is much smaller than it was in 2008. Sure. And number two,
can you also tell our listeners, though, Congressman, that no further banks will fail?
Well, I think that there's no way that you could ever say that none will. I think none will if we don't panic. I can say that. If we don't panic, I don't think that you'll see anything, another bank fail immediately. I think that we do need to look at down the road whether or not stress testing or there are other things that we could do to prevent something, the next 2, 3, 4 years down the road. But I think that if we don't panic, that's the key. Sometimes, I was just telling someone earlier, if you jump in the water and you panic, that could cause another problem. But if we don't panic, we've already heard that the government has said that those individuals who have their money in these two banks will have access to their dollars. So there's no need to panic from other regional banks. And if we do that, then I don't think that you'll see a failure coming immediately after the phase now.
There you have it from Congressman Gregory Meeks. Congressman, we do thank you. Greetings to New York. Coming up, we'll discuss what the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank means for the future of regulation with Bloomberg's Ben Bain and Wendy Benjaminson. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg.
The banks are open. Everything is fine, calm. Now the FDIC is in charge of the bank, and they'll be communicating any further details about the future. But basically, the management has changed. This was important. This is not a bailout of government taxpayer dollars.
Everything's fine, nothing to see here. That was New York Governor Kathy Hochul this morning talking about the aftermath of Signature Bank's rescue specifically. That brings in the New York element. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Balance of Power. Thank you for joining us. Along with Bloomberg's Ben Bain now in studio and Wendy Benjaminson here to talk about the future of regulation following the collapse of these banks. Welcome, Ben and Wendy. It's great to see you. Ben, I'm going to start with the idea of a bailout here. We've been told that this was not a bailout from the administration. Not everybody in Washington sees it that way.
Yeah, so that's clearly the message that everyone is trying to say, from whether it's a state regulator, whether it's a federal regulator, whether it's the president himself. The message being sent out is this is not a bailout. What actually happened last night was the federal regulator stepped in with some extraordinary measures and effectively said that all deposits in these two institutions that failed late last week and then over the weekend are going to be protected. So depositors can get their money back. That's extraordinary because normally there's a limit. There's basically a $250,000 limit per account per depositor. And they basically said, that goes away in this instance, and people are going to be covered.
That was the key part of that statement, all monies. Is the U.S. government basically saying all of your deposits are now insured regardless of the limits? I know it's just these two banks, but what's to say that they will not do this again?
That's what people are very much talking about right now. That's certainly people are saying effectively you've taken this long-standing $250,000 limit and thrown it out the window. Now what indeed happened is this is limited to one facility. This is limited to these two institutions. But there is a legitimate question. Once you've done this, where does it stop? And if some of these other regional banks, some of these other mid-sized lenders that were kind of wobbling, that we saw their share prices tumbling, if they run into similar problems, what's the expectation? What's the government going to do?
Wendy, let's talk about the political side of this. It's huge. I went back and rewatched George W. Bush's speech from September of 2008, when he addressed the American people in prime time to say, we have a financial crisis, and nothing had been done yet to fix it. How did Joe Biden do this morning in shoring up confidence?
Well, he certainly gave it the old college try, right? I mean,
All right, then.
He told everybody that their money was safe. The messaging has been, as Ben said, the messaging has been very consistent across the board. Yeah. And he, made it known that he was being briefed, all through the weekend and all night by his economic team, and that they were taking steps over the weekend to try to make people whole and to try to get past this. So, I'm not sure what else he could have done. It does seem like they're trying to show that they're under control. Yeah.
Nikki Haley on Twitter, Joe Biden is trying to say this isn't a bailout. Don't listen to him. It is. Then you had Governor DeSantis talking about the fact that the bank was focused too much on diversity and not actually focused on the bank at hand. Will this actually be a 2024 issue?
I think the economy will certainly be a 2024 issue. And Biden and the Democrats, I should say, just survived a midterm where inflation was, in some places, in double digits. It was, not a good economic situation at all. Gas prices were through the roof. Banks failing makes people start to feel like the ground is not secure under them. And if this isn't quelled by the time people are really paying attention to politics, if there's still this sense, and I do think the Republicans will continue to make it an issue as long as possible, then it could be.
Remembering that some of these rules were rolled back in 2018 from Dodd-Frank. Ben, that's been one of the big questions in Washington today. Was this about a lack of regulation or a lack of enforcement?
So it's not to say that if the changes that occurred in 2018, basically some of these middle-sized lenders, so not the biggest banks on Wall Street, but some of the middle-sized lenders, basically got out of the strictest type of regulation, the most onerous stuff, having to do yearly stress tests, having to do all of these things, which were literally thousands of hours of work each year. They got out of that with a law that was bipartisan, signed by President Trump in a big ceremony in the White House back in 2018. And effectively, the question now is if things were different, if that hadn't happened, if that rollback hadn't happened, would any of this have happened?
Exactly.
And arguably, it probably would have given regulators maybe a little more visibility into what happened, but it's very hard to draw a direct line between those changes and to say none of this would have occurred. At the base of what happened here, there were long-term bets on treasuries. Essentially, the bank was putting money into safe assets over the long term. The Fed very quickly raised interest rates. And as people got nervous and some sectors that these banks supported started to feel pressure, it was very difficult to sell those assets. And that kind of fed it itself, and that's how we ended up here.
And on top of the regulation, the FDIC chairman said last week this aggressive Fed rate rise is part of the reasons why the banks are in this uncomfortable footing. Bloomberg's Ben Bain and Wendy Benjaminson, thank you so much for joining us. Coming up on the program, Democratic Governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, will be with us to discuss if he expects any blowback for the national banking crisis. He once worked on Wall Street. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. Now, as the failure of SVB reverberates across the financial sector, we're joined now by someone with a unique perspective on the issue, Governor Wes Moore of Maryland. He joins us from outside the State House. Governor, thank you so much for your time. It's such a busy day. But you're a governor with actual hands-on experience on Wall Street. How should our institutions respond to this?
Well, I think as governor of the state of Maryland, what was really important to see was that the people who put their trust inside the financial institutions, that they weren't going to get hurt, that the people who were our entrepreneurs and our job creators, that they had an opportunity to be able to make payroll and take care of their employees because of a challenging situation that had nothing to do with them and their decisions. But then also making sure that our small, our regional, and also the banks that are closest to the community, that we make sure that they are fortified. I mean, really what this is about is ensuring that for our small banks and our mid-sized banks and our regional banks, that the chance to ensure liquidity to our small businesses, the chance to ensure liquidity to the individual citizens, that had to be maintained. And so we're thankful that we come to the formal resolution, but also knowing that the challenges that we potentially are facing, that we still have to address head on.
I wonder your thoughts on the way this was handled by the Biden administration, Governor. It sounds like you're in favor of the way this worked out over the weekend, but there are a lot of questions about whether this is a bailout, whether the government will now have to cover all uninsured deposits around the country. I guess the question I'm getting to here is, do you still want to see an auction process should the rest of whatever's left of SVB be sold off?
Well, I think one thing that we have seen is that the leadership of SVB, the ownership, and also the ones who were in charge are not being bailed out. The investors are not being bailed out. We're talking about the depositors. We're talking about the individual small businesses and the people who actually held accounts there. Making sure that they are supported and they are not being hurt or punished by something that they were not at all responsible for. And so I do think that as we're thinking about this work going forward, ensuring that that smaller banks and regional banks, many like the ones we have here in the state of Maryland, that we are not watching a flight from them, that we're not watching further consolidation of the financial industry, but that we're also making sure that our small businesses and the ones who are closest to our small businesses, that they can still be fortified and they can still be supported.
Governor, I want to move along and also talk to you about some of the issues that are going on ahead of 2024. One of them is crime, and it's something you're focused on. The president had a bit of a reversal, and he's actually siding with Republicans. Is now getting national attention, this D.C. crime bill. Do you think he'd made the right decision, given the fact that crime is going to be one of the key talking points going into this presidential election?
Well, I think that the number one responsibility of any chief executive is to make sure your people are safe. There is nothing that is of higher priority than for me, I know, in the state of Maryland. And so I look at the fact that, I believe deeply that we can both invest in law enforcement and also make sure that communities are being safe and supported and feel safe in their own communities and in their own skin. And it's not a choice, that it's not binary. The reason that we have made, real significant and historic investments in local law enforcement, $122 million to include $17.5 million going towards Baltimore City alone, and also knowing that we need to make sure that we have police that move with appropriate intensity and absolute integrity, and have full training mechanisms in place, that it's not a choice, that we can and we will do both. And so I think the thing that we're continuing to see, and I think the thing that we have to be assertive on going into 2024 and all further elections, is that the job of chief executives is to ensure that people can feel safe in their own homes, in their own communities, but also in their own skin. And we can and we have to make sure that we're balancing that.
Brings us to the matter of the FBI, Governor. You're vying to make Maryland the new home of the FBI, and none of us, if that happens, will complain about that building on Pennsylvania Avenue going away. But this is a battle essentially between Maryland and Virginia. You've even challenged Virginia's Governor Glenn Youngkin to a bit of basketball here. Listen to Youngkin here, your neighbor, making his case for why the state should be home to the new FBI headquarters, and we'll have you respond. Here he is.
The new FBI headquarters belongs here because we have a rock-solid case for why Springfield, across each and every one of the criterion, will in fact result in the decision to put the FBI headquarters right here in Springfield, Virginia.
Governor, this has essentially come down to an argument over proximity to the FBI training facility in Quantico versus diversity. What would this mean for Maryland, and why should Maryland have this over Virginia?
Well, I would say it's actually bigger than that, because when you look at the criteria that the FBI and the General Services Administration has actually laid out, I would argue that Maryland wins on every single one of the categories. That if you talk about cost, to put it in Virginia, it's going to cost upwards of $1 billion more money to American taxpayers to put this in Virginia, because Maryland is the only site that is actually site ready and ready to build now. If you look at transportation assets, Maryland actually has built-in transportation and metro assets that are ready to be utilized. Virginia currently does not. If you look at aspects of the future mission of the FBI, where Director Wray, the director of the FBI, has said that a huge part of the future mission is going to be on cyber. Well, Maryland is the home of the NSA. Maryland's the home of U.S. Cyber Command. Maryland's the home of Fort Meade. Maryland's the home of three of the top institutions of higher education focusing on cyber: Johns Hopkins University, the University of Maryland College Park, and Bowie State. And so we actually have the pipeline built in a way that actually drives the future mission of the FBI. And yes, there is also the piece of equity. And you know, if you look at Fairfax County, Virginia, on economic competitiveness, they're currently number 2. In the country in economic competitiveness. Prince George's County, Maryland is 107. So actually, I think Maryland actually wins on every single category that GSA and the FBI are looking for.
Maryland Governor Wes Moore, we thank you for the insights, Governor. I think he's made that argument before.
I wish all political debates could be solved with some football or basketball something.
Indeed. Coming up, we're going to talk with Republican Congressman Bryan Steil of Wisconsin about the continued fallout of SVB and bank regulations going forward. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV alongside Anne-Marie Hordern. I'm Joe Matthew, and we do have breaking news before we get back to our coverage of the banking crisis that's underway. We've just learned that Mitch McConnell, of course, the Republican leader in the Senate, has been released from the hospital. This happened a short time ago. A statement from his office says his concussion recovery is proceeding well. The leader discharged today. He will then go into a period of physical therapy, remembering that he did fall down last week and was hospitalized after that fall at a hotel here in Washington, D.C. The failures of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank separately now have sparked a renewed debate over a 2018 act of Congress that rolled back some regulatory burdens for small and mid-sized banks, rolling back portions of Dodd-Frank. The president pointed a finger in that direction earlier today as he called for stronger regulation. Listen.
During the Obama-Biden administration, we put in place tough requirements on banks like Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, including the Dodd-Frank law to make sure that the crisis we saw in 2008 would not happen again. Unfortunately, the last administration rolled back some of these requirements. I'm going to ask Congress and the banking regulators to strengthen the rules for banks to make it less likely this kind of bank failure would happen again.
Well, let's get some specifics on this. For help, we turn to Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons. Kaylee, what have we learned?
Well, Joe, this 2018 act, which, mind you, had bipartisan support, did scale back certain elements and requirements under Dodd-Frank. Perhaps most importantly, it changed the threshold in assets that banks needed to have in order to be subject to the most stringent requirements and stress tests. That number went from $50 billion in assets up to $250 billion. And guess which banks fall below that threshold? Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank both had less than that in terms of assets when they failed over the course of the last several days, as do other regional banks that have come under continued market pressure in recent days because of concern out there of contagion or the idea that they could fall victim to similar forces. And of course, we've heard not just from the president, but other prominent Democrats like Senator Elizabeth Warren pointing a finger at those 2018 changes, casting blame there. But we have also heard conflicting views here at Bloomberg, including from Barney Frank, one of the co-authors of Dodd-Frank, who said he doesn't think that those 2018 changes were really a contributor here. And I was speaking with a former OCC regulator earlier who said this is about an age-old problem. It is the duration gap and the mismatch between assets and liabilities that leave banks vulnerable when interest rates move higher. So it raises the question of whether this is about existing regulation that needs to be enforced better or whether new regulation is needed. Now, we do understand that the administration is looking into the Fed's supervision of these banks, and the Fed itself is conducting an internal review with the vice chair of supervision, Michael Barr, saying that regulators need to be humble in this case and really look at how they were regulating and supervising these banks and learn from that experience. On the subject of experience, though, I just want to put all of this into context. Yes, multiple bank failures in the span of just a few days is concerning. It is not great, but still look at how that compares to financial crisis years. In 2009, 2010, there were bank failures in the hundreds. This moment, Anne-Marie, according to administration officials and lawmakers we speak with, is very different.
Yeah, I'm sure the president would like everyone to see this chart. Thank you so much, Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons. Now, the fallout of SVB has left the state of other financial institutions, as Kaylee mentioned, shaken and created the question of whether stronger regulations should be in place to prevent a future crisis. Joining us now to discuss this is Republican Congressman Bryan Steil of Wisconsin. Rep. Steil is also chair of the House Administration Committee and a member of the House Financial Services Committee. More regulation? Is it on the way?
What I think we're not surprised at is that there's many on the left who were tax and spend approach driving the inflation, looking to find a scapegoat other than inflation. And I think out of the gates, when we look at this, why was this mismatch occurring on the balance sheet? In many ways, it was a high inflation rate that the Federal Reserve came in, aggressively moved interest rates up. Instead of blaming inflation, instead of blaming the reckless spending in Washington, I'm not surprised many on the left are looking for alternative scapegoats.
Would that suggest, Congressman, that this would not have happened if the Fed, for instance, had started earlier?
Well, I think we're going to have a full after-action report, and so I don't want to make final determinations as to what exactly caused these banks to have an exact problem.
That would have prevented the massive run-up or the quick run-up that we've seen in rates, though, right? It would have been a more gradual.
Yeah, I think we had not only bad monetary policy, but we also had bad fiscal policy in Washington. And so the Fed was late to the game to raise interest rates. We're all aware of that. But also we continued to see after the end of the pandemic, Democratic Party, one-party control in Washington go on a really aggressive spending binge. When you combine that with the monetary policy, that was one of the key drivers of inflation. If anything, this should remind us in Washington that job number one is bringing inflation down and getting it under control.
I know you questioned Chair Powell about this last week, and he was actually talking about fiscal spending at this moment is actually much less. He did say, though, the number one, as you just said, job is to get inflation down. But now traders are betting that potentially this year there will only be one more Fed rate hike or none because of this crisis. The Fed's not hiking. How are they going to get inflation down?
Well, one of the concerns that we talked about in last week's hearing with Chairman Jay Powell was the lack of consistency on messaging from the Fed. The Fed needs to remain consistent and firm in their comments that we are actually going to tame inflation. It seems like every time we make some progress in this regard, we get comments on the other side and the market bets that we're not going to see higher rates continue. That only drives inflation further. If anything, we need to make a firm commitment following these bank failures that we're going to truly tame inflation.
Congressman, you're getting briefings and you're hearing information through your committee that most Americans are not privy to. Can you tell our viewers today that more banks will not fail?
I think broadly we see that the banking system is well capitalized. The banks that had problems had kind of unique circumstances on their balance sheets that were exacerbated by a dramatic increase in interest rates. And so I don't know that anybody can make that statement, but I will say that in all of my conversations, it sounds like more broadly, our banks are well capitalized, and these are somewhat unique circumstances for these specific banks.
Given this backdrop, do you think there'll be an easier path forward to raising the debt limit because maybe Washington doesn't want to spook financial markets?
I don't know that raising the debt ceiling is going to be easy in any circumstance. I think what it does, though, is it brings attention to the fact that we need to come together today to begin the conversation about how we're going to get our fiscal house in order here in Washington. Everyone's aware that we're spending way beyond our means. It's one of the key drivers of inflation. Now is the time to have the president come to the table and put forward a path to fiscal stability.
Congressman, we thank you for being with us and sharing our first day here in Washington on Balance of Power. Many thanks to Bryan Steil of Wisconsin with us here on Bloomberg TV. Coming up, consequences of the SVB fallout rippled across the globe. President Biden meeting with Australia and England on a new submarine deal today. We'll speak with Republican Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota coming up next. First, Mark Crumpton is here with First Word. Mark?
Joe, thank you. Pfizer says it will buy cancer drug maker Seagen for the enterprise value of $43 billion. The acquisition is by far the biggest takeover of the year. Pfizer will pay $2.29 a share in cash for Seagen. That's about a third more than the drug maker's closing share price Friday. Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla talked with Bloomberg's David Weston about how the partnership will benefit his company.
It's giving us the ability to repeat once more what we did with BioNTech and the technology of mRNA against vaccines. With vaccines, now we can do it against cancer. It is a unique technology. It is called ADC, and this technology can become one of the biggest answers to many cancer tumors that right now we have suboptimal solutions.
Pfizer has been under pressure to show it can capitalize on its COVID-19 windfall after vaccine revenue almost doubled its sales in a single year. New York City is poised to miss the worst of a powerful late winter storm that will bring heavy snow to areas north and west of the city overnight into Tuesday. Forecasters say the city will get mainly heavy rain. High winds could cause power outages and travel delays. And we bring you some breaking news. The Department of Justice is probing the collapse of Do Kwon's Terra USD stablecoin. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. We'll continue to monitor the story. Global news powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
Australia is a proud non-nuclear weapon state and is committed to stay that way. These boats will not have any nuclear weapons of any kind on them. Each of us standing here today representing the United States, Australia, and Great Britain is deeply committed to strengthening the nuclear non-proliferation regime.
President Biden just now in San Diego, speaking in this past hour on the submarine deal with England and Australia. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Anne-Marie Horduran, and we're joined now by a member of the Senate Armed Services and Banking Committee. Mike Rounds is with us. Senator, thank you for joining us. This deal has been long in the making, of course. I'd like to get your thoughts on it, as China says it violates the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty because it transfers nuclear technology to a non-nuclear state. Are they right?
Look, Australia is one of the Five Eyes. They are one of our closest partners. I'm not exactly sure what China is suggesting in this particular case, but I can tell you we look forward to having a continued, very close relationship with Australia. And if Australia wants to participate in our nuclear submarine programs, I am totally in favor.
Senator, we also want to ask you about the story of day, which is, of course, SVB and the financial chaos that this has ensued. Sir, obviously we're hearing from a number of lawmakers on the left, Democrats who are talking about the fact, and the president himself, that Congress needs to do more. There needs to be more regulation. Do you foresee any sort of regulation scrutiny coming from Congress in this session?
I think the first thing we do is to get the facts, and we find out whether or not the regulators that had the authority and the capabilities to actually review these transactions that have occurred and the balance sheets, along with the liquidity statements that are already required. Let's find out whether or not they did their job. I understand that the Federal Reserve is looking at it. I think Vice Chair Barr is going to head up that committee. They'll take a look at whether or not their review of this particular institution was done correctly. Then we'll be able to find out whether or not they had access to all the data that they wanted. You know, in this particular case, we're talking about a liquidity problem, not necessarily a capital problem. The vast majority of all of the different bank institutions, they have good capital requirements in place right now. They are well capitalized across the industry. In this particular case, you had a unique type of an institution that catered to a particular niche section of the market. It's a very large part of the market, and it had about half of all of the venture capitalists that were directly involved with technology and also with healthcare that are within the United States. So they had a real unique niche location in the industries that are important, small business development and so forth. But what we want to know is, what was the logic behind them taking a lot of their capital and putting it into long-term treasuries, 10-year treasuries, that if they needed the liquidity, they would take a real haircut in taking out that in a short-term basis. So let's find out whether or not the Fed was aware of it, whether or not the regulators had looked at that and just simply didn't think that inflation was going to be a problem, or if there was something, you know, that needs to be done. But in terms of the liquidity, they get a form every quarter, every single quarter. It's called I believe it's called a 2052A form that they have to report back into the Fed to share what their liquidity plan is.
Well, Senator, the president wants to talk about regulations, he said this morning, and I suspect that means your committee. What's your reaction to the administration coming up to Capitol Hill asking to tighten or retighten, in some cases, financial regs?
Once again, it's better if we get good data first. Let's not do a knee-jerk reaction. Let's find out what it is that it's going to take. Data first, then we can decide whether or not we need to modify anything there, and whether or not the regulators actually utilized the data that is being provided right now. I think that's a really important part of this discussion that we're going to have. The other thing that I think when we talk about this type of a discussion, more regs and so forth, there is a cost every time you put a new regulation in effect, and we're going to have to determine whether or not new regulations would actually be needed or not. I personally would want to get a lot of the facts first and then make a decision. And the other piece of this is let's make sure that the regulators use the tools that were available to them, because they have the ability to tailor the regulatory aspects on a bank-by-bank basis when needed. And then let's find out whether or not there was actually a good set of reports coming in that were actually by the regulators before we start talking about adding on additional regulation.
Senator, it sounds like you want more data, so it sounds like potentially we could see hearings from Congress before we see any sort of legislation. Thank you so much for joining us, Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota. Coming up, well, Rick Davis and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino on set discussing what's happening in Washington as we ramp up to the 2024 election. This is Balance of Power. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV alongside Joe Matthew. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. Now, joining us, Rick Davis and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino discussing 2024 GOP presidential hopefuls, Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump, and also, obviously, the news of the day. What does all of this mean ahead of 2024? Rick, first to you. The president today is calling on more regulation. He brought up 2018. But I think what he failed to mention was that 17 Democratic senators, 33 Democratic congressmen and women voted to ease that regulation.
Yeah, I think it's a very good observation because at the end of the day, that was a bipartisan reform. They had to ratchet back in order to allow growth in the banking sector. And it was universally seen as a good correction to the old Dodd-Frank bill. And so to idea that somehow that had something to do with the bank crisis at Silicon Valley Bank is just a mismatch. But he's not the only one mismatching, right? I mean, Republicans have been lining up to make this about ESG, and that's a big mismatch, too. So what we see is people are using this as a way to sort of position themselves on politics rather than really focus on what some of the substantive issues are. You're going to have a lot of committee hearings around this issue. So, yeah, you probably could see some corrections in the regulations.
So everyone's got someone to blame here. Jeannie, Donald Trump, who Anne Marie mentioned, is blaming President Biden. Quite a message on Truth Social today. Joe Biden will go down as the Herbert Hoover of the modern age, and he predicts a great recession bigger and more powerful than that of 1929. This is on its way to being issue number one in the presidential cycle?
It absolutely could, because Donald Trump knows, whatever you think of him, his political instincts are right on point. He knows that this is a fraught issue for the White House. Anytime you have a White House of either party bailing out any sort of segment of the population. Well, Joe Matthew, it's not a bailout, but it sort of is. And so this is the challenge. So Donald Trump has differentiated himself from some of the Republicans Rick was talking about, people like Ron DeSantis, who are saying that this is all about wokeism and ESG, and then you've got Mitt Romney saying the government did a good thing, they handled it well. You have then Donald Trump coming out and saying this is more about Joe Biden's, inability to manage the economy. Everybody, this is exactly what I warned you about. And that's the message I think he's going to try to carry into 24.
Everyone's talking about a bailout, but it really almost is a bail-in. The depositors are protected. There's now this new precedent, really, about the threshold of that insurance. But if you bet on this company and you invested in it, you're out of money. But Senator Warren, in an op-ed today, regulators have said that banks rather than taxpayers will bear the cost of the federal backstop required to protect deposit. We'll see if that's true. Does Biden have a problem with the left now after this?
Anne-Marie, I think he has a real potential problem. I think part of it's going to depend how long does this go? Do other banks begin to fail? Is there some kind of contagion that they're trying to stop? If there is, he is going to feel pressure from the left. This is on top of what happened with Willow. This is on top of the D.C. crime bill. All of a sudden, Joe Biden is back to moderate Joe Biden that progressives didn't like in 2020 to begin with. So he could have a problem on his left flank. He's going to have to control for that. But of course, as you get into 2024, moderates, they may not find that too much of a problem. So he's trying to play both ends against the middle, may hurt him if there is some kind of primary on the Democratic side.
Rick, you were actually at the White House with former President George W. Bush in September of 2008 when he brought your then Senator John McCain and a guy named Barack Obama. He invited them both to the White House to help sit down and hash out what he declared that night in prime time, a financial crisis. That was the beginning of Dodd-Frank, what became Dodd-Frank. Did Dodd-Frank go too far since it was then portions rescinded in 2018, or should have they kept it right where it was?
Yeah, look, I mean, that was a big moment in time, and I would say the difference between this and that was timing. This happened over a weekend, and that happened over 2 weeks.
How about that?
And so markets were roiling during that period of time. But I would say, sure, that gave the opening to Dodd-Frank for a massive reform bill. And as we were talking with Anne Marie earlier, that needed to be corrected in time. And now there'll be a correction to this. Look, there are already people anxious to do this kind of banking bill. I mean, Tim Scott wrote to the Fed last week ahead of this thing. Tim Scott, and he says, cash controls. And so, like, you've got a guy who may be running for president who's ranking on banking. I like the sound of that. And all of a sudden is like in the spotlight. You'll notice, though, he's been really quiet today. So I'm sure they're getting their ducks together.
Would that letter have gone out this week?
Yes, I think it would have been one of the reasons why he felt that this crisis occurred is because of the level of cash requirements on banks that the Fed had been imposing. And that could have caused a crunch with a bank like this, with the size bank that this had grown into. I mean, the meteoric rise in capacity that this bank had over the last 5 years was very, phenomenal, and having the ability to set aside the capital requirements was really tough for this bank.
Fascinating conversation with the best panel in the business. That's Rick Davis, of course, and G.D. Shanzano, two voices we trust. You're going to be hearing and seeing a lot more from them here on Balance of Power. Check out the Balance of Power newsletter on the terminal and online. And my God, what will tomorrow bring?
Yeah, well, it's going to be a busy one. Thanks for joining us on our first Balance of Power live from Washington, D.C. Tomorrow, here we go, Joe.
Yes.
We'll speak with Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. A story that we really need to touch upon is this Willow project that the Biden administration is now back.
Would have been the lead story today otherwise. We'll also be joined by Senate Banking Committee Chair Sherrod Brown. These are the voices you can count on hearing and seeing. We'll see you tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.